Imagine a force so powerful, so relentless, that entire empires fell at its feet. Picture a wave of warriors sweeping across vast lands, leaving destruction in their wake. This was the Mongol Empire, a juggernaut that conquered much of Asia in the 13th century. But what happened when this unstoppable force reached the borders of Europe? Could the fractured kingdoms and armored knights of the West stand a chance against an enemy unlike any they had ever faced? Today, we're diving into a story of epic clashes, desperate defenses, and surprising resilience. This is the tale of how Europe fought back against the Mongols, a battle for survival that shaped the course of history. So, buckle up, and let's journey back to a time when the fate of a continent hung in the balance. The Mongols, under the legendary Genghis Khan, had already carved out one of the largest empires the world had ever seen by the early 1200s. They crushed mighty powers in Asia, like China's Song dynasty and the Khwarezmian Empire, using their unmatched speed, discipline, and brutal tactics. Asian nations fought hard, building huge armies and strong defenses, but few could stop the Mongol advance. There were rare moments of hope, like in Japan, where the divine wind, or kamikaze, seemed to protect the islands from invasion, or in places like Galit in the Middle East, where resistance held firm. But Europe was a different story. Unlike Asia, where defenders often knew the terrain and the enemy's ways, European kingdoms faced a completely foreign threat. The Mongols didn't fight like anyone the Europeans had encountered before, and their arrival would test the West in ways it had never been tested. Before we get to the heart of Europe's struggle, let's set the stage with the Mongols' first encounters in the region. By the early 13th century, the Mongol Empire was expanding fast. After dominating much of East and Central Asia, their gaze turned westward, toward the lands of the Eastern Rus, a collection of principalities that served as a gateway to Europe. In 1222, Genghis Khan sent two of his top generals, Subutai and Jebe, on a scouting mission into these territories. Their goal was simple: explore the region and gauge its strength. Along the way, they clashed with nomadic tribes like the Cumans and Kipchaks, who lived on the vast steppes. Alarmed by the Mongol presence, these tribes sought help from nearby Rus principalities, including the key city of Kiev. Together, they formed a coalition to face the invaders. In the spring of 1223, the two sides met at the Kalka River. The combined Rus and human forces were large, but they were no match for the Mongols' superior tactics and discipline. The battle was a disaster for the coalition. The Cumans were crushed, and the Rus army suffered a staggering loss, with an estimated 50,000 men killed. The Mongols, on the other hand, barely lost any troops. This Battle of Kalka was a turning point. It marked the Mongols' first major appearance in Europe. After their victory, Subutai pulled his forces back eastward, but not without leaving behind a network of spies in the Rus lands. These agents kept a close eye on local events, gathering information that would prove vital for future campaigns. Armed with this intelligence, Subutai returned in 1237, this time with Batu Khan, leading a massive army of around 12,000 troops. This was no longer a scouting mission. It was a full-scale invasion of the Rus territories. Over the next 3 years, the Mongols waged a brutal and efficient campaign, destroying major cities like Kiev. By 1240, they had completely subdued the region. But they didn't stop there. Subutai and Batu sent scouts and spies even deeper into Europe, reaching as far as Poland, Hungary, and Austria. These missions were part of a carefully planned strategy for a much larger attack on Central Europe. In 1241, the Mongols launched a massive, multi-front assault. They split their forces into 5 groups to confuse and overwhelm the Europeans. Kaidu and Ordokan struck northern Poland. Baydar hit southern Poland. Shiban moved through northeastern Hungary. Subutai and Batu led the main invasion into Hungary, and Guyuk advanced through Transylvania. This strategy was designed to prevent European armies from uniting into a single force. At the same time, Mongol troops pushed into parts of the Holy Roman Empire and Austria, spreading fear across the continent. Europe, however, was in no shape to respond. In August 1241, Pope Gregory IX passed away, leaving the Catholic Church without a leader at a critical moment. King Bela IV of Hungary begged for help from Frederick II, the Holy Roman Emperor. But Frederick, who had personal disputes with Bela, refused to send major support. Instead, he focused on rallying forces within Germany to defend his own lands. His attempts to unite the German princes failed miserably, leading to civil war within the empire. Europe was fractured, with no unified plan to face the Mongol threat. By early 1242, the Mongols continued their rampage, looting and burning as they withdrew from Hungary. Their raids reached into the Balkans, threatening Constantinople, then under the control of the Latin Empire. As they pulled back, Batu sent more forces into regions like Halic-Volhynia, further destabilizing Eastern Europe. Eventually, Batu halted his army not in Mongolia, but in the Volga steppes, setting up a strategic base that kept Europe on edge. Meanwhile, Western Europe remained divided. The Holy Roman Empire and other kingdoms were caught up in their own conflicts, and the ongoing war between France and England drained resources that could have been used against the Mongols. Despite Emperor Frederick II's calls for unity and letters urging France and England to act, no major effort was made to prepare for another invasion. Europe was vulnerable, with no clear strategy to counter the danger. For those on the front lines, like King Bela IV of Hungary, the situation in late 1242 was grim. The Mongol invasions had left deep scars across Europe. The numbers are staggering. Between 5 to 10 million people are estimated to have been killed in just 2 decades, as the Mongols tore through the Russlands, Hungary, and Poland. Major cities were nearly erased, with populations dropping by 80 to 90%. In Kiev, once a thriving center of trade and culture with around 50,000 people, only a few hundred survived after the Mongol attack, mostly those who fled in time. In Poland, over 70% of major settlements, including cities like Krakow and Sandomierz, were destroyed. The population fell by 30 to 40%, and many areas were abandoned for decades. The land itself suffered, with 30 to 50% of farmland ruined or unusable. Roads, bridges, and trade networks were shattered, and local economies took 50 to 100 years to recover. Some never did. Hungary faced the worst of it. The Battle of Mohi in 1241 became one of the darkest moments in Hungarian history. About 50% of the country's population, roughly 1 million people, were killed or enslaved. Rural areas were devastated, with 40 to 50% of villages burned to the ground. Farming collapsed, leading to widespread famine and a long economic crisis. Beyond the physical destruction, the Mongols broke entire societies. The psychological toll was immense, as survivors lived in constant fear of another attack. King Bela IV knew the Mongols might return, and he wasn't about to let Hungary fall again. As soon as he returned to his kingdom, he began rebuilding. During the invasion, he noticed that while much of Europe was in ruins, 5 stone castles east of the Danube had survived the Mongol onslaught. Wooden and earth fortifications, on the other hand, had been easily destroyed. At the time, Hungary had only about 10 stone castles, mostly near the Austrian border. Bela ordered the construction of more stone fortresses, especially in hard-to-reach areas west of the Danube. By the end of his reign, nearly 100 new fortresses stood tall, a huge increase aimed at protecting the kingdom. He also learned from the battlefield. Hungary's light cavalry had struggled against the Mongols, but the few heavily armored knights, including those from the Templar Order, had performed well in close combat. Bela created a new corps of armored knights, inspired by Western European models. In 1247, he made a deal with the Knights of St. John, giving them land in southeastern Hungary in exchange for help in building more cavalry units and fortifications. Bela's reforms didn't stop there. 2 years later, he recognized small and medium landowners who served under him as nobles, and new settlers were given noble status if they agreed to fight as armored cavalry. This strengthened Hungary's military significantly. By 1259, Bela also reached out to the Pope for help in hiring at least 1,000 crossbowmen from Venice, a city known for its military tradition and skilled infantry. Crossbows had proven effective against the Mongols in past battles, and Bela wanted to ensure his army was ready for any future threat. Diplomatically, Bela worked to build alliances. He brought the Cumans, a nomadic Turkic people who had fled to Hungary earlier, back into his kingdom. After their leader was killed, they had sided with the Mongols, but Bela offered them land and marriage ties. His son even married a Cuman princess. In return, the Cumans settled in the devastated Great Hungarian Plain, acting as a first line of defense. Bela also formed marriage alliances with Polish dukes, Bavarian leaders, and princes from Halig-Volhynia and Rus territories. He encouraged the ruler of Halig-Volhynia, Danilo Romanovich, to break free from Mongol control, creating a buffer state between Hungary and the Mongol Empire. Additionally, Bela stayed in contact with the Pope and the Holy Roman Emperor, seeking support in troops or funds. At the same time, the Pope took steps to understand the Mongol threat. Pope Innocent IV, elected after a long delay, called the Council of Lions to address major issues, including the Mongols. He sent envoys to learn more about this enemy, the most famous being Giovanni da Pian del Carpine. At 65 years old, Carpine traveled to Karakorum, the Mongol capital, facing incredible dangers. He returned with letters from the great Khan demanding Europe's submission. More importantly, he gathered valuable information, interviewing survivors and observing Mongol tactics. Carpine wrote a detailed book with advice on countering the Mongols, suggesting Europeans mimic their military structure, keep scouts on constant alert, and operate under unified leadership. He also proposed exploiting divisions between the Mongols and the people they ruled, believing liberated groups could become allies. Sadly, his warnings went largely unheeded, as Europe remained divided. The Mongols weren't done with Europe. In 1260, they struck Poland again under Burundi, causing even worse destruction than before. The Polish received no outside help and were quickly overwhelmed. In Bulgaria, during the 1270s, Mongol forces under Nogai raided yearly. It wasn't until 1283 that Nogai suffered a major defeat against the Serbs. In 1285, Nogai and Talabuga launched another attack on Hungary, splitting their forces to strike from multiple directions, just as they had done in earlier campaigns. Their army, likely between 30,000 and 50,000 strong, relied on speed and surprise, hoping to catch King Ladislaus IV off guard. But this time, Hungary was ready. The Mongols faced immediate challenges. Heavy snow in the Carpathian Mountains slowed them down, and food shortages weakened their troops. The Hungarians had learned from 1241, evacuating villages, taking supplies with them, and fortifying castles. This left the Mongols with nothing to plunder. When Talabuga's forces reached Pest, they found it deserted, with residents safe in nearby strongholds. Hungarian scouts, disguised as Mongols, gathered critical information, allowing Ladislaus to time his attacks perfectly. The Hungarian armored knights proved too strong, and the Mongols' usual tactics failed against stone castles and prepared defenses. Talabuga ordered a retreat, but his army was ambushed in the Carpathians by local forces, suffering massive losses. Nogai, meanwhile, ravaged Transylvania, but couldn't breach Hungary's fortifications. Local troops, led by Roland Borsa, crushed his forces before Ladislaus even arrived. The second Mongol invasion of Hungary ended in total failure. Though the Mongol threat seemed contained for a moment, they struck Poland again in 1287. While they pillaged rural areas, fortified cities held strong. Hungarian lords, inspired by their recent success, sent aid to Poland, marking a rare moment of cooperation. This was the last major Mongol push into Europe. Those smaller raids continued into the 14th century. Their power began to wane due to internal conflicts and external resistance. European powers like Hungary, Poland, and Lithuania seized the chance to push back, reclaiming lands and weakening Mongol control. The story of Europe's fight against the Mongols shows how resilience, strategy, and even small acts of unity can turn the tide against overwhelming odds. It's a chapter of history that reminds us of the power of learning from the past. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If you enjoyed this video, please hit that like button and subscribe. It takes just a second and means the world to us. Let's aim for 1,000 likes in the first 24 hours. If there's a battle or event you'd love to see next, drop your ideas in the comments. I can't wait to hear from you. See you in the next video, and take care.
but no one is questioning. But the way as the boy expands his government.